Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into a political pamphlet that, well over 170 years after its first publication, remains one of the most influential and, frankly, debated documents in history.
You're talking about the Communist Manifesto.
Exactly, the Communist Manifesto. You've almost certainly heard its rallying cry, "Workers of the world, unite." But what did it, truly mean back then, and what can it teach us about society today?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah. So, our mission in this deep dive is to unearth the core ideas of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, explore the historical context of their, well, a powerful call to action, and look at why this short text continues to spark so much conversation and confusion and passion. We'll be examining the specific sources you've shared to understand its origins, its core definitions, some maybe surprising policy proposals, and how its predictions have, well, how they've unfolded or haven't.
It's truly fascinating, isn't it, how a document from 1848 London, published by the Communist League, how it continues to resonate so powerfully.
Yeah, but
And what's fascinating here, as the materials you provided highlight, is that Marx and Engels, they were essentially trying to articulate a kind of scientific socialism for, a wide audience.
Okay, scientific socialism.
Yeah, they were laying out their understanding of history and society, not just as some ideal future, but as an inevitable progression they saw coming.
So if we're going to unpack this, the real core, the heart of their argument, it's this idea of class struggle, right? From what I gather in the sources, they basically divided society into two main classes, starkly different ones.
That's the crucial starting point, yes. They identified what they called the bourgeoisie
Right.
and the proletariat.
Okay.
So the bourgeoisie, often referred to as the capitalist or ruling class in your sources, they're the ones who own the means of production.
Like factories, land.
Exactly. Factories, land, machinery, all that. They effectively monopolize wealth, and their income comes mainly from profits, investments, rents.
And historically, where did they come from?
Well, historically, this class emerged back in medieval Europe. You had traders, merchants, industrialists. They started accumulating wealth through industry and trade. And they tended to uphold the status quo, emphasizing, individual achievement.
Right. Often living pretty comfortably, maybe even extravagantly. Access to education, all that.
That's the picture painted, yes. Comfortable lifestyles, quality education.
Okay, so that's the bourgeoisie. Then on the other side, you have the proletariat.
Yeah.
How did Marx and Engels define them, kind of in opposition?
Right. The proletariat are the working class majority. According to the sources, they own essentially only their labor power.
Just their ability to work.
Precisely. They have to find employment to survive, and they receive minimal wages or salaries, generally living at, a bare subsistence level. No capital, no real political influence as individuals.
And their values were different, too.
Completely different, according to Marx. In direct contrast to the bourgeoisie, their values tended towards social change, collective interests, thinking about the group.
So this stark division, this setup, it leads us straight to what Marx saw as the core dynamic driving it all: exploitation.
That's a heavy word. Can you elaborate on that?
It is a heavy word, and it's absolutely central to the manifesto's argument. Marx contended that the proletariat performs labor that creates economic value.
Okay.
But that value is then taken and sold by the bourgeoisie for profit. The workers, however, get wages that are consistently lower than the actual economic value their work creates.
Oh, so there's a gap.
A huge gap. This extraction of surplus value, as he termed it, that's precisely what Marx identified as the root of the inherent class struggle within capitalism.
So it's not just about making money. It's built on taking.
It's a stark claim, yes.
Yeah.
That the system isn't just generating wealth, but fundamentally building it on an unacknowledged theft from labor itself. That's a powerful and, provocative idea even today.
Definitely. And this idea of exploitation, it then feeds into Marx's bigger picture, his theory of historical materialism. That sounds grand, like a theory of everything for history. It absolutely is grand in scope. Historical materialism basically posits that society at any given time is fundamentally ordered by how it produces and exchanges goods. Its economic mode.
An economic base, right?
Exactly, the base. And this base then forms the foundation for its political structure, its laws, its intellectual history, its culture, the superstructure.
So connecting this to the bigger picture.
Marx argued that history, especially after, primitive tribal society dissolved, is essentially just a history of class struggles.
Always between the exploiters and the exploited.
Yes. between those exploiting and those being exploited. He saw it as a progression driven by these underlying economic forces and these inherent conflicts. He thought it was, well, inevitable.
Which brings us to one of the most iconic opening lines in political writing. It almost sounds like something from a Gothic novel. A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. It's so vivid, almost spooky.
It really is.
What was Marx really trying to evoke with that imagery, based on the sources you looked at?
Well, it's a brilliant, multi-layered metaphor, actually. Marx used this phrase to highlight the widespread fear among the powerful elites at the time.
They were scared of communism.
They were, and they would often just brand any opponent, anyone they disagreed with, as a communist, just throwing the term around to discredit radical ideas.
Ah, okay.
But in doing so, Marx pointed out, they inadvertently acknowledged communism as a growing power in itself, a force that was increasingly recognized, even if it was feared.
So he was kind of turning their fear back on them.
In part, yes. Your sources show that Marx was sort of marking the misinformation, the bullshit being spread, as one source put it, about communists. He was doing this right before he openly defined what communists actually believed and aimed for.
Interesting. So setting the stage.
Exactly.
Right.
There's even an alternate English translation that really emphasizes this mocking tone. A frightful hobgoblin stalks throughout Europe. We are haunted by a ghost, the ghost of communism. He wanted to clear away the spooky stories and define communism scientifically on his own terms.
That's a perfect lead in then. After dissecting society and hinting at this looming specter, Marx and Engels don't just leave us with theory. They hit us with this direct, electrifying challenge. Probably the most famous line from the Manifesto. Workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. You have a world to win. Wow.
It's powerful stuff.
So powerful. What's the core meaning behind that for the listener? What should we take away?
Well, this slogan really encapsulates Marx and Engels' belief that the socialist revolution had to be led by the workers themselves. The core idea, as your sources lay out, is that, individually, a worker might feel powerless.
Yeah, makes sense.
But united, the working class, the proletariat, is unstoppable. It's a direct call for them to become aware of their shared struggles.
To gain class consciousness.
Precisely. Gain class consciousness, realize they're in the same boat, and then unite to change the status quo, to shift power to themselves.
And the key is that international aspect, right?
Mm-hmm.
That workers in different countries have more in common.
Exactly. More in common with each other across borders than they do with the owners, the capitalists from their own countries. It's about forging this powerful international solidarity, overcoming national divisions.
And this wasn't just some abstract thought bubble. It had real historical impact, didn't it? It became more than just words on a page.
Oh, it certainly did. It took on a life of its own. Interestingly, a similar phrase actually appeared a bit earlier in Flora Tristan's 1843 book, The Workers' Union.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But Marx and Engels really popularized it, cemented its place in history. The International Workingmen's Association, that's the first international which Marx co-founded, they actually changed their motto to "Working men of all countries unite," to really reflect this principle, this proletarian internationalism.
And other groups picked it up.
Widely adopted. Groups like the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW, use it constantly in their publications, on banners during May Day demonstrations, even when they were protesting World War I, arguing workers shouldn't fight each other.
So it became this global symbol of worker solidarity, cutting across national lines.
Absolutely. And its most powerful symbolic use was probably becoming the official state motto of the Soviet Union.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, emblazoned on emblems, banknotes, coins, even on the front page of the newspaper Pravda.
So it was everywhere in the Soviet sphere.
Pretty much. And your sources also highlight some significant variations, like Lenin's directive for the Second Comintern Congress was, "Workers and oppressed peoples of all countries unite."
Ah, broadening it.
Exactly. Expanding the scope to explicitly include an anti-colonial agenda, aiming to unite racially subjugated people alongside the global proletariat in a bigger anti-imperialist fight. It really showed how adaptable, how impactful that core message could be.
Okay, so this call to unite leads directly to the Manifesto's vision for change. Marx predicted capitalism was inherently flawed, right?
Yeah.
That would lead to crises and ultimately revolution.
Yes, he believed the exploitation of the proletariat, the internal contradictions of capitalism, would inevitably lead to a series of escalating crises, culminating in a violent revolution.
Led by whom?
Led by what your sources call an enlightened vanguard of the proletariat. Basically, the most class-conscious workers.
And after this revolution, what happens then?
The working class would seize control of the means of production, the factories, land, everything we talked about earlier.
Okay.
And ultimately, they would abolish capitalism entirely. The end goal was to pave the way for a classless, communist society.
Classless. Meaning,
Meaning no more bourgeoisie, no more proletariat, and where private property, especially ownership of the means of production, would be replaced with collective communal ownership, a total societal transformation.
wow, that's huge. And the manifesto didn't just paint this big picture. It actually laid out some specific policy proposals, didn't it? Like immediate steps toward this classless society.
It did. While the ultimate goal, the central purpose, was the abolition of private property.
Right.
Marx and Engels recognized that getting there would involve transitional steps, and they knew these would probably need to be adapted based on local circumstances. But they outlined 10 key measures.
Okay, what were some of them? Because I heard some might sound surprisingly familiar today.
Some might, some definitely won't. First, the abolition of property in land and applying all rents from land to public purposes.
Okay, abolish private land ownership. Got it. What else?
Second, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax.
Okay, that one does sound familiar.
Third, abolition of all right of inheritance.
No more inheriting wealth. Wow.
Fourth, confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels.
Okay, taking property from those who leave or oppose the new system.
Fifth, centralization of credit in the hands of the state. Basically, a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly on credit.
So the government controls all banking and finance and inheritance. That's a massive expansion of state power, isn't it?
Absolutely, a huge centralization of economic control.
What about industry, communication, everyday life stuff?
Well, sixth was the centralization of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state.
State-controlled trains, post, telegraph.
Presumably, yes. Seventh, the extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, bringing wastelands into cultivation, improving the soil generally, all state-directed.
Okay, more state ownership.
Eighth, equal liability of all to labor, establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture.
Industrial armies for farming. That paints a very specific picture, like a militarized workforce.
It certainly suggests a highly organized, almost regimented approach to labor, doesn't it?
Yeah. What were the last two proposals?
Ninth was the combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, trying to gradually abolish the distinction, the separation between town and country.
Interesting. Integrating rural and urban life.
And 10th, free education for all children in public schools, along with the abolition of children's factory labor.
Okay, free education, ending child labor. Those also sound familiar, or at least like goals many societies have adopted since.
They do. And what's truly striking about this list, when you look at it through the lens of your sources, is that contrast. Some ideas, like progressive income tax or free public education, clearly foreshadow elements now common in modern welfare states.
Right.
But others, like abolishing inheritance or confiscating property and creating industrial armies, they reveal the really radical, revolutionary intent behind it all, rooted in that specific 1840s context.
It's crucial to remember, though, as you mentioned earlier, the manifesto wasn't just a policy wish list. Engels saw it as something much bigger, right? A scientific theory of history.
That's a really crucial distinction they made. Engels himself explicitly stated that this core proposition, historical materialism, class struggle leading to proletarian victory, was, and I quote loosely here, destined to do for history what Darwin's theory has done for biology.
Wow, that's a bold claim, comparing themselves to Darwin.
Incredibly bold. It presents communism not merely as a nice idea, an ideal future society someone dreamed up.
But as a prediction.
Exactly. As a prediction of the eventual, inevitable victory of the proletariat, based on what they genuinely believed was a scientific analysis of historical development. They thought they'd cracked the code, uncovered the fundamental laws driving societal change.
Okay, so we've covered the vision, the theory, the proposed steps. Now for the reality check. Let's talk about the legacy and the critiques of the Communist Manifesto. I mean, this document, its impact is just immense, undeniable, isn't it?
Absolutely undeniable. Its ideas just reverberated incredibly powerfully into the 20th century. They influenced movements, revolutions, governments all over the world.
Like, how widespread are we talking?
Well, as your sources point out, by around 1950, nearly half the world's population lived under governments that at least nominally, claimed to be Marxist.
Half the world, that's staggering.
It is, and it directly influenced massive historical events, most famously the Russian Revolution of 1917.
Right.
After that revolution, the Manifesto basically became required reading in the Soviet Union and was just massively disseminated, translated, spread everywhere.
And its reach today.
Still huge. It's estimated to be one of the 4 best-selling books of all time. And it's even registered in UNESCO's Memory of the World program, recognizing its global significance. Its legacy is, well, it's massive.
But, okay, the massive legacy is clear. But the big question hangs there. Was Marx right? Did his core predictions, especially that inevitable collapse of capitalism and the imminent worldwide workers' revolution, did that actually happen the way he envisioned?
Yeah, that's where reality took a very different path from the theory in many key respects. Many of Marx's core predictions just haven't come to pass.
Like the collapse of capitalism.
Right. Capitalism hasn't collapsed. In fact, as the sources discuss, it's shown remarkable adaptability. Governments brought in reforms, things like minimum wages, worker protection laws, anti-monopoly regulations, stuff that simply didn't exist in Marx's time.
And those reforms perhaps softened the edges, prevented the predicted explosion.
Arguably, yes. They mitigated some of the most extreme forms of exploitation that Marx observed and based his predictions on.
And what about the class structure he described? That stark division, bourgeoisie, proletariat, and nothing much in between. Did that homogeneous working class ever really form?
It didn't quite crystallize in the way he predicted. And crucially, the middle class. Marx thought it would largely disappear, get squeezed out, polarized into the 2 main camps.
But it didn't.
No, quite the opposite. It's actually grown significantly in many capitalist societies. Your sources even note that Marx himself, later in his life, acknowledged the persistence of what he called the petty bourgeoisie, small business owners, artisans, that sort of middle layer.
Okay, so the class structure evolved differently. And what about the places that did have communist revolutions? Did they achieve that end goal, the classless, moneyless, private property-free society?
Well, no. The real-world states that called themselves communist, the Soviet Union, China, Vietnam, Cuba, others, they never actually achieved that stateless, classless, moneyless utopia Marx envisioned.
What happened instead?
Often, highly centralized authoritarian states emerged. And many of those countries have, over time, relaxed their rigid, state-controlled economic policies, allowing for more market activity, private enterprise, essentially moving away from the strict Marxist model to achieve economic progress.
So, okay, if the big predictions didn't pan out and the real-world examples deviated so much, why is the manifesto still relevant? Why are people still reading it, debating it? Why do some contemporary writers even call it, as you mentioned, a manifesto for the 21st century?
That's a great question, and it really speaks to the enduring power of some of its core observations, even if the predictions or solutions were off.
What kinds of observations still resonate?
Contemporary writers often highlight its insights into the dynamics of global markets, the tendency towards recurrent economic crises, the persistence of vast inequalities in wealth and power.
Things we still grapple with today.
Absolutely. The manifesto vividly described what it called the constant revolutionizing of production, the uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, the everlasting uncertainty and agitation that characterized the capitalist era, that feeling of constant change, disruption, globalization. It feels very modern, doesn't it?
It really does. Even if the solutions proposed didn't work out as planned, the diagnosis of certain tendencies within capitalism, that still hits home for some.
Precisely. The analysis continues to provoke thought, even if the prophecy failed.
Now, there's also that one specific phrase people often bring up as a criticism, something translated as the idiocy of rural life.
Yeah.
That sounds really dismissive, quite harsh. Can you clarify that for our listener? What's the context there?
Yes, that's a really important clarification that the sources address. It sounds terrible in modern English, very condescending. But idiocy in the original context, drawing from the Greek root idiots, didn't mean stupid. It referred more to the status of being a private person, someone concerned only with their own private affairs, cut off from the wider political or social life of the community. So it meant something closer to isolation or narrow horizons of rural life compared to the more interconnected, politically charged life of the cities at that time.
So it wasn't calling rural people stupid, but rather pointing out their isolation from the main currents of political and economic change.
Exactly. The original meaning got lost in translation over time, leading to this common and understandable misinterpretation. It really underscores how vital historical and linguistic context is when reading a document like this.
Definitely. It's also kind of fascinating, isn't it, that a document which argues material factors, economics, determine everything, that this document itself as an idea has been such a powerful historical force.
That's a really interesting tension, isn't it? A kind of paradox that critics often point out. As the writer Nadezhda Mandelstam observed, sometimes the real stuff of history is ideas. The Manifesto argues for material determinism, but its very existence, its influence, demonstrates the sheer power that ideas, declarations, and texts can have in shaping human events, shaping consciousness, driving revolutions, creating whole new systems of government and society.
So the idea itself became a material force, in a way.
You could definitely argue that. It's a testament to the enduring power of human thought and articulation, even when that thought is arguing, perhaps ironically, against its own primary importance.
So wrapping things up, we've taken a pretty comprehensive look at the Communist Manifesto. We've gone from its foundational definitions of class struggle, the bourgeoisie, the proletariat, exploitation,
Historical materialism.
right, to its bold predictions, those sweeping policy proposals, and finally, its incredibly complex and contested legacy. It's a text absolutely steeped in its time, the hungry 1840s, a period of massive social upheaval in Europe.
Absolutely. Born from that specific moment.
But it's clearly one that continues to provoke thought about the forces that shape our societies, those fundamental relationships between power, wealth, and labor.
And while, as we've discussed, many of its direct prophecies remain unfulfilled, you have seen how its core observations about, say, economic power dynamics, social division, that constant revolutionizing of production, how those things can still seem relevant, can still resonate today.
It really forces you to think.
It's a document that continues to invite analysis, debate, reinterpretation. It compels us to consider how far we've come since 1848, and perhaps, in some ways, how much remains fundamentally the same, or at least recognizable.
Indeed. So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. If the manifesto correctly identified that constant revolutionizing of production and that everlasting uncertainty and agitation as defining features of the modern era, what does that tell us about our own rapidly changing world today with AI, globalization, climate change, and maybe more importantly, what responsibilities might we have in shaping its future?